I'm in my zone.
Lester the Unlikely, Atari's E.T., and Zach Zero all walk into a bar. The bartender looks up and says, "Yeesh, what's wrong with you guys?" And they all answered, "We just played Nascar the game, inside line, online." Hey, this is Zero at ReviewZoneHD, and I'm bringing you guys a review for this year's NASCAR title. And yes, it's got nice graphics, lots of new features and upgrades compared to last year, but don't let this title fool you. It's a flaming hot mess with more issues than I've ever seen in a racing game, and this is even counting Wheels of Destruction that I reviewed earlier this year. And I really wanted this game to succeed because I like NASCAR games, and last year's title showed some promise, and even this year shows a lot of potential for what could have been a very awesome game, and there were moments that I did enjoy my time with it. But then it will make sure to remind you of why stress relief exercises were ever created, because this game will test your patience online or offline. If you haven't been following my own coverage and still want to know more about this game, let's go ahead and get into the review. Again, the graphics on here look pretty nice. The cars and the tracks were all really well done, especially the lighting effects and the nighttime racing was especially awesome. I don't really have many complaints with the way this game looks because overall it definitely gets the job done. When bumping into other cars, you can see immediate real-time car damage to both your car and the computer, and the damage itself doesn't look generic. It appears as if it was a dynamic result of that specific impact. But for every good part of this game, there is a downside. Online is still a graphical mess as cars clip through one another, and offline I did see several instances of frame rate drops that I showed examples of in a previous video. The caution replays on this year's title still don't properly show what happens sometimes during some of the cautions because of weird camera angles, so that's just one of many issues that carries over from last year's game. Last year's NASCAR game was accused of being too easy, even on the hardest setting, and the developers must have heard this loud and clear because this year can be overly difficult depending on what setting that you're playing on. It's also best to avoid the challenge modes until you get very familiar with the game, and even then it's still not a mode that I would recommend spending a lot of time in, as a few of the hard challenges are borderline cheating and almost unbeatable. Even once you get the hang of trying to control the car with no assists on, the challenge itself can be extremely frustrating because of how they're set up. But if you focus on the AI of the computer cars in the single player modes, they're a lot more realistic in how they race this year. They give you space to move around in, they react to your own movements, and overall were fun to race against. But they can be a bit too aggressive at times when they're directly behind you, and they are programmed to draft tap you, which can cause some problems if you're about to go into a turn. But as with everything else, there are issues with this part of the game as well. For whatever reason, the cars will slow down to an almost complete stop in the middle of the track to pit sometimes, instead of getting down and off the track. And not even the great spotter can give you a big enough heads up to prevent you from slamming into the long line of pitting cars. And finally, the computer's pitting strategy was a bit questionable at times, so this led to a few races that ended up being a lot easier than what it should have been.
Car in front's heading to the pit. Keep rolling, keep rolling. Do your best, man. What?
This year the spotter is awesome. He tells you exactly what you need to know without annoying you, and his suggestions were especially helpful if you're in the driver's seat viewpoint. It got to the point that I actually trusted what he was saying enough to dip into spots on the track without actually looking to see if another car was there. They nailed this part of the game, and it's one of its best features. Also, all of the instructional and menu commentary sounds upbeat and enthusiastic, and it seems like most of these guys had fun voicing their parts, so that's another bright spot on the game. The soundtrack was decent, the engine roar and tire squeals were good. The only real complaint I have with the sound is it did completely cut out twice until I paused the game and then it came back on, but this was such a minor issue compared to the rest of the issues, it's hardly even worth mentioning. Let's start with the good parts. The career mode this year is great and offers a lot of reasons to grind through every race as you work on unlocking upgrades, accessories, and random knickknacks. The tuning dramatically changes how your car reacts on the track, and making pit stop adjustments are a huge part of the fun of tackling some of the tougher tracks. My first impressions of the game overall were pretty positive until the glaring issues began piling up one by one. The online is completely and utterly broken to the point that it's close to unplayable. I spent 2 hours one evening trying to get into a room with more than 3 players and had very little luck, only managing to get 2 races going that began with half of the room being disconnected and even more getting dropped during the cautions. Testing on several different days ended with that same result, and I've made 2 or 3 videos discussing these issues. As far as playing offline, the one biggest issue that I've come across was the fact that the paint booth for customizing your car is completely useless, as you can't use a custom scheme in either career or season mode, which makes absolutely no sense and sucked a huge portion of the enjoyment out of both modes for me personally.
I need to recharge.
You know what I find helps? Rest and relaxation. Turn the TV off, just have a little me time.
I really wanted to like this game. I enjoy racing titles, and I also enjoyed playing last year's NASCAR game offline, as its online mode was also busted almost as bad as this year's. But even when I bite my tongue and try to look at the positives on here, there's just too many technical issues to really get a vote of confidence from me that it's ever going to get sorted out. But if you're a diehard NASCAR fan and if you enjoy playing offline, you may find yourself enjoying a lot of the new features that have been added to this year's title if you can look past its initial problems. Just don't expect to do anything online unless they do a complete overhaul and patch the countless issues found on there and fix the way the game searches for matches. And even then, if all that gets sorted out and the online works perfectly, don't expect a lot of great racing from your fellow peers. All it takes is one bad apple to ruin an entire race. Most matches I played in this year and last year usually ended up being a caution-filled grind fest. If you are still interested in buying this title, I would highly recommend doing your own research on forums first to get an idea of if any of the issues that I've discussed that took place during its first week of release have been fixed. Anyways, this is Zero at ReviewZoneHD, and thanks for stopping by.